Hey, Carlo, how are you?
Good. How you doing, man?
Thanks for joining me on Indispensable Appraisers podcast.
There you go.
There you
We are
go.
indispensable.
I like that one. There you go. Hey, first question is the valuation industry in general. How are we doing? Is there anything we're winning at? What are we doing a good job, if anything?
I think that if we're doing a good job of making our industry obsolete. If there is one thing that I think that is becoming obvious, but also I think that stepping up to the plate, to the task at hand in the modern thing, I think that the energy that's building around that is good. So I think we're doing that good. I think we're coming together as appraisers and uniforming, kind of forming like a Voltron and gelling together. I see that happening more. So I see that good. And also just being relationship among appraisers has always been good. We've always done that
Do you think that's changed much in the last few years at all? Like, are appraisers coming together less? Or do you think
good. I think
they're
we come together
still
more. I think we're coming together more. I think we're coming together.
okay? And where do you think is our greatest challenges?
Our greatest challenge is the structure of becoming an appraiser, which I'm sure everybody's heard before. Our next challenge is that we're battling the finance industry for relevancy and to maintain our role in the process of real estate acquisition and finance and mortgaging. And that while they're trying to go, they feel like they can figure out technology to do what we do. Um, it's not really that simple, but we're not prepared for that battle with that industry. Also, I think that our biggest challenge is that we have to understand that um, appraisers and the real estate industry is really an asset, especially when you get into commercial and investments. That's really a new phenomenon in the world, and that we need to develop more acumen, more lanes in the real estate valuation process.
So when you talk about new phenomena, industry as an asset, what do you mean by new lanes?
Well, one new phenomenon is that since the S&L crisis, real estate has become an investment asset, and which was what the late 80s when that went down.
Mhm.
And since then, the 90s and 2000s, over the last 30 years, real estate has become really an investment asset to the masses. Before then, it was really reserved to really high net worth or corporate type stuff, but it wasn't as lucrative as it is now. You didn't have as many people investing in real estate. Now it's all across the board.
Do you think part of that might be data? Because back in the day, appraisers were just masters at getting the data because it was so hard to get all this disparate data about a property. You'd actually
Mm-hmm.
go to different offices, plat maps, aerials, flood, wetland maps. Sales data was so hard to get. And as data got more and more available, do you think that's changed the dynamic of the role of the appraiser that yes, we can make fun of CoStar data but there is so much data out there. Do you think it's makes appraisers going to have to pivot to use the data in a more sophisticated way? Because there's so many investors have access to comp data. There's data in general when it comes to a property. Is that what you mean by appraisers need more of a differential? Because the data is there for the most part.
Yeah,
You pay for it.
I think that one we need an appraiser analysis level too, which is probably a step below becoming an appraiser, where they're working with these investment companies, these REITs, and just purely running cash flows, taking the data, running cash flows, instead of like I'm never like these guys are never gonna be an appraiser. They have no interest in valuing individual assets. They're just there to run cash flows for large corporations or these investment companies. And I
Okay.
think that is a segment kind of off into the self, but I think that's where, at least as the institute, not maybe the industry, but the institute needs to put effort into.
Okay, and you said we're not prepared for the battle. Did you mean with the mortgage industry's trend to try to use more technology instead of appraisers?
Absolutely, absolutely, we're not prepared for that. So if you look at the data that's being collected, whether it's commercial or residential, they're preparing this stuff to essentially automate everything and get it down to a certain amount of reasonableness to make a lending decision. Commercial real estate as well. They're collecting all of the sales data, they're collecting the revenue data, they're collecting all the expense data. So now they can run models of direct cap or DCFs on using different variables and scenarios and get within a certain reasonable area of value based upon all these variables in place to make a decision whether to lend or not. It's not really an appraisal, but it's using data analysis to limit their risk. And we're not on the front side of that as appraisers, analysts to take control, harness that, take control of it, and get in front and monopolize that from an appraiser's perspective for an appraisal industry. I hope all that makes sense. That's a
And
lot.
I know it does, but I want to double click on, which is my third question, where do we go from here? So how do we prepare for the battle? You know, you're speaking to a lot of appraisers right now. So what would you recommend how we participate? How do we pivot? How do we improve our value prop to our customer base? And a lot of it, to your point, is going to be financial institutions. I do think they provide most commercial firms. This came up in another pod. I guess 50 to 60%. Some people think it's 70 to 80% of their revenue. That's a big deal, right? So how do we participate, or maybe ask the question, why, if you feel that banks are trying to push technology more than appraisers, I don't know if that's necessarily true, but if that's a trend, what are they not getting from appraisers, and what do we need to do?
When I say they're trying to push technology more than appraisers, what I'm saying, look, appraisers are trying to use technology to produce appraisal reports. These mortgage companies and the mortgage industry is using technology to understand value. So it's two different premises or areas of focus. Instead of us focusing on producing the reports, we need to put our energy into the valuation part, not in the report production.
And how do we do that? What, and by the valuation part, do you mean better analysis, better reports, more customer service?
More data analysis,
Okay.
harvesting the data that's available, pulling it together, like in layering the data together.
All right.
Uh, I think that we pretty much need to put the boxing gloves on too and go out there and say the overall problem that I see with appraisers, in my perspective, is that we've spent too much time in the back corners of the real estate industry just producing reports and developing values. And we have not battled to prove our expertise in the real estate industry to where now we're kind of like a unknown factor and we're fighting for relevance. We need to be out showing our expertise to the masses, participating, hopping on panels, producing letters, producing articles in all sorts of mediums, putting stuff out there as just flood the market with our expertise so the industry can understand who we are, what we are, and you cannot duplicate our skill set no other way.
That's a good point. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing the podcast, is to get a voice, a narrative, and just different opinions to say, hey, I'm an appraiser. Like, I've never met you before. So it's great to meet you. So as we get out to communicate and go on other people's podcasts. So I was recently on a a bank's podcast. And it's funny, he was interviewing me as an appraiser, not as a tech person. And it was interesting to talk to a bank president saying, yeah, you appraisers, you guys are kind of off on your own. We don't really get to talk to you, and you can blame Dodd-Frank, which I think, by the way, is what really hurt appraisers is out of sight, out of mind, right? Or if you're a chief
Mhm.
appraiser in the bank and you're no longer the chief, the C-suite, you're not because you're working at home, but you're kind of pushed to the sidelines. And I do think, including chief appraisers at banks, who, by the way, I think they really do care about their appraisers, but I think both the fee appraisers and the chief appraisers got pushed to the sidelines, to your point, that they don't often get an opportunity to provide their expertise either to their C-suite in the banks, or, as to your point, us in general, to just our industry in general. So and I know you covered a few of them, but what would you do? I don't know, let's say you're the president and CEO of the Appraisal Institute, and I know that's an association, but let's just pick with that because it does have a voice. What would you promote? What would you start doing? What would you stop doing? Any ideas?
I think I would. One, I would seek to make, I would start making sure we have better visibility in the real estate realm. Um, I see that as probably our number one factor. And I think number one, A, would be I would seek to modernize the commercial real estate report and reporting requirements and what banks are looking for in their reports and what's really defines value and what really defines the definition of what is a good report and what is a qualified report.
Are you talking about that we should go to common templates or formats? That's
Not necessarily. It's just I think that we are built on producing reports that have. I'll tell you a story.
okay. I love stories.
The way I was raised, I was actually trained by 4 MAIs. I worked on the 4 MAIs as part of getting my appraisal license. And we were produced. I would write the report, and they would review the report, and they would come back with all these edits. I mean, just pretty much just highlighted my whole report in red. Great training, but then when you get down to okay, you're saying the parcel number and the property address 30 times, and you got to discuss the conditions of the property throughout the report. Well, maybe the report should be set up where you're just one paragraph is just telling you what's wrong with the property, the market area, one paragraph in the market area, and here's the basis for valuation. The whole structure needs to be evolved into a modern format,
Okay.
not based upon. I mean, to be honest with you, I was looking at reports. I seen a report a couple weeks ago where the guy's still copying in and scanning in pictures into the report, and he's sending this stuff to a bank, and the bank's accepting.
Wow.
So, how does that look when it's like we're talking about relevancy in the industry and they're underwriting with somebody like at that level, and not a bad appraiser, not it's not a quality thing of their value. It's just a status of technology and modernization where we are in the world.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying because a lot of reviewers feel that, the fee appraisers feel like they work hard, the fees are compressed, so they do their best with what they have. On the reviewing side, if we're talking about lending, I think the ratio goes from 30 to 50% of reports that get kicked back. And it doesn't have to be a structural problem. It could be just small typos. but I think 30 to 50% makes both sides a little sad, right?
Right.
The reviewers don't want to read, to your point, subject property is the same information 30 times. And I think we've been trained, um, I'll say older MAIs, I had the same story where it was, here's a neighborhood, it's got to be 8 pages. Here's a highest and best use, it's got to be voluminous. Here's,
Right.
all this stuff, and the reviewers don't want to read it. They want the appraisers to talk to the reader. SWOT analysis, here's what's good about the property, here's what's not so good about the property. If I had my money at risk, this is what I'd be concerned about. Here's the upside, here's the downside. Here's how the subject fits in the market. And a lot of appraisers, I think we have, to your point, we have so many check boxes and we're worried about the reviewer asking all sorts of questions that some appraisers just leave in too much boilerplate because they figure the more words, the more stuff, I'm not going to get a phone call back, as opposed to your point, take out all the fluff, all the boilerplate. Nobody wants to hear about the weather in Philadelphia, and put in information that is meaningful to the property, and be lean and mean with the format and make it a very readable document that you would like to read as an investor or as an appraiser. I think that's our challenge.
And a meaningful market analysis. I mean, the market analysis really like define your market. Like, really, what is the market of this property? And tell me about what's functionally happening within that segment. You can read appraisal reports for days and still have reports that never speak to the competitive market of the subject property. But it's still well written, it's still put together nicely, good color charts and everything, but it still doesn't speak to the market and the competitive market. So instead of, putting together these beautiful reports or making sure we hit a fully scoped out highest and best use, you know, really what does the lender need to put money out on that real estate? But then, I gotta say that crabs in a barrel process needs to change too, where they have us all bidding on, they have people bidding on reports, and lower fee turn time is a problem. That is and I mean, I guess about 70% of our book is 50 to 70% of our book is mortgage, commercial mortgage. But the bidding process is just, as interest rates got up, it's just gone to, it's just gone down. Fees have gone down. The larger corporate interest in the appraisal industry that's doing mortgage lending appraisals, they have just cut their fees to the point where the smaller shops is hard to function because they have to keep their team together. So they're just going, $2,000 for a job that was getting 3,500, $4,000 3 years ago.
Yeah, I definitely agree that the crab in the bucket is, I think it's a bigger issue with what you said earlier, which is really training appraisers not to be technicians, but to be business people. And you shouldn't just drop your price, right? Shouldn't be your go-to. And appraisers collectively react, they get fearful, the work gets slow. So instead of the fee being $3,500, to your point, they drop it. It's a huge percentage drop, as opposed to saying, no, I'll diversify, I'll create additional lines of business, I'll talk to my client, maybe they want evals, I'll do tax appeal right away. There's so many different things you can do, but most appraisers, since there are technicians, I do think we need a huge amount of change in education, of just business education, that you don't do that. Like, you don't just drop your price and plummet when things get a little slow and you get fearful. That's not a good business model.
It's not a good business model, but I think that the mortgage industry has adopted the AMC concept, and they realize that there's appraisers out there, qualified or not, that'll do a $3,500 job for $1,500. And just like they took $750 residential appraisers and now getting it done for $300. And long as the number on the paper works for the loan, who really cares? From their perspective, until a collapse happens and they got to realize why we're taking back all this real estate.
Yep, definitely. Cool. Anything else we didn't cover, Carlo?
I mean, I can go on the days about stuff in the appraisal industry, but I think that if we're going to survive as an industry, which is necessary for us to survive, then we need to be out in the forefront displaying our analysis to the world. We need to be on CNBC. We need to be on, producing articles. We need to be out in the forefront talking, speaking, not just showing up at limited events or just doing mortgage work and just we need to be out there. There's no reason why I can't sell real estate, but if I took $100,000 Mercedes Benz and put it on Facebook Marketplace for $25,000, I could find a buyer for my client. Whereas the same thing with real estate. That's essentially what these brokers are doing. They're trying to say, I know the value of the property, run a cash flow or do a direct cap and have it all screwed up, come up with a number, put it out there for sale and tell their client that, look, I sold your property. We got the number I said, blah, blah, blah. I'm a great broker. No, it doesn't really work like that. I hope that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. Well, I really appreciate you joining me on Indispensable Appraisers podcast, Carlo.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.